Today's podcast is all about success stories when it comes to saving and budgeting. And I'd like to start with one of my personal favorite saving success stories. Right before Amanda and I got married, we swapped cars. We were getting ready for the wedding. I drove an SUV. She drove a sedan. In particular, she had this older Pontiac. It was the first car she ever got. She received it as a gift, I believe, when she was in high school from her father. And the paint was peeling a little bit. It still ran pretty well, though. They took good care of that vehicle, mechanically speaking. So I was going to get the Pontiac and drive that to and from work. Meanwhile, she was going to get the SUV. She lived closer to where we were going to get married. We were long distance. And the goal was that we could load up her stuff into the SUV and take that out to Utah, where we were going to live after we were married. So I had her car for a little bit, and I got used to driving it. But shortly after we got married, we came back and we had the two cars, right? We were a two-car family. We had the SUV, the sedan, and it was getting ready to rain. Big rainstorm coming through, and it was fine. Got into the sedan. It was not under the covered parking. We only had one covered parking spot. And because my car was a BMW, I wanted to put it under the covered parking and leave the older car with the peeling paint out in the rain. For better or for worse, that was the decision we made. And when we got out to that car again to go drive, I can't even remember where, I got into the passenger side, and I remember my feet hitting the carpet, and it sounded like squish, squish. And I looked down, and the carpet was not only sopping wet, but it looked oily, and it smelled nasty. What had happened, according to the mechanic I talked to, was the rain was coming down the windshield of the car when it was just sitting there, and the seal on the bottom of the windshield had failed, and the water seeped through that seal into a gutter that's there supposedly to catch like oil drippings or something from the engine, and it rolled down this gutter, which terminates just above the passenger seat where you put your feet. So all that oily water, all that oily rainwater was like filling up and then spilling over into the cab of the vehicle. I'm sure there were other seals and things that had failed in order to get that to happen, but that was the last straw with that car. Now, before we move on, you have to understand that Amanda had been told by her sister that she should probably replace this car. As it was getting older and older, she was getting more and more pressure from her family to replace it. However, it was still working. Again, it was mechanically sound, and it just didn't look as pretty as it used to. No big deal. Now, that wasn't the only reason she resisted replacing it. Part of the reason why Amanda held on to that car up to this point was she didn't want to spend the money. She didn't want to let go of her savings to buy another vehicle. This was in part because she had worked hard for that savings, and she didn't want to spend money if she didn't need to. Again, the car was working fine. But the other part was she didn't know if she could afford to let go of money to buy another car. Even if she had ample saving beyond what her budget would be for that car, the replacement car, well, what if she needed it for something else? She did not know. The security of the savings was comfort, more so than having a newer car that looked prettier or was more reliable. So we're married, and the car is just not going to work for us anymore. It's not, in my opinion, worth fixing. So we need to replace it. It's just time to replace it. We ended up looking at our budget. We had been budgeting since we got married, and we were a couple months into marriage at this point. And we had broken down all of our savings. We combined all of our savings. We combined our checking account. We combined everything. And in doing so, we broke up the savings into individual sinking funds, into individual savings goals. We said, out of what we already have, how much should we apply to each of these in case a big purchase needs to come up. We had already allocated enough money to buy a replacement car from the onset. Now, that's not to say that, we just magically had the money. Amanda had been saving, and she had been doing a good job saving for years in order to have the money there for the car. It was at this point Amanda expressed her feelings about, I don't know if we'll need the money for something else. So we went through the budget. We went through all of our sinking funds. We went through the savings goals. We looked through the things that could happen in the next 5 years and the things that would happen further down the road. And we looked at what our financial picture would look like if we spent the money that was dedicated for a car right then and there. And that gave her comfort because she knew that the what ifs, the opportunity costs that the savings could be, were taken care of. The allocation had been made. The emergency fund was there. Security existed even on the other side of buying a car. I'd say that the ultimate result of having gone through this was, in effect, spending the money emotionally before we ever cut a check for the car. It was already done on paper. We had already made the decision. It was just a matter of finding the replacement car. I had done a little bit of research on what was going to be good and reliable. We were looking for a small SUV. In particular, I preferred the idea of finding a Toyota RAV4 or some sort of equivalent, something that was going to be really reliable. Our budget was around $15,000. With our savings in mind, I did some research online and I found that there was a dealership just walking distance from our condo where we could buy a Toyota RAV4, and it was in great shape. The pictures looked amazing. So I said, Amanda, you want to go check out this car? We'll go see if it's something that we want to test drive and buy. So we left, and we didn't even take our checkbook. We were just going to go look at the car. We walk into the dealership, and I was like, hey, do you guys have that red RAV4 here? And they're like, they laugh at us, and they're like, oh yeah, we're going to sell that car today. They knew how popular that car was, and they knew how good a shape that thing was in. So they handed us the keys and just told us to go out back, find it, and take it for a test drive. They didn't even follow us. They didn't even try to sell us the car. They knew it was going to sell itself. We knew that we had run into a very interesting deal at this point. This was unlike any dealership visit I had ever made in my life. And if you listen to podcast episode 3, you know that I've had my fair share of interactions buying cars. I digress. So we go out to the back, we find the car, we test drive it. It's great. The thing looks flawless. It was like a car that had been sitting in a garage for the last decade, being driven like 100 miles a month. And they were asking for less than Kelley Blue Book on this thing, and it was in our budget. So we just went back in and we were like, we're going to buy it. We're going to buy it. They called back the other people who were coming to see the car to let them know, hey, it's gone. It's sold. It had been up there for less than 24 hours, and we bought it. And it was easy. It was the least pain that I've ever felt cutting a check. Amanda even had to take the Pontiac back to go get the checkbook because, well, we had left the house and we were not necessarily expecting to be able to jump that time. We thought we might need a little more time to process the purchase, but everything lined up. Everything was ready. It was the opportunity, and we took it. From the time we originally left the house to the time we drove home with the new car, keys in hand, it was 45 minutes. The whole process took 45 minutes, and we had no sense of buyer's remorse. Weeks later, we were still genuinely happy with the purchase. Because we were intentional with the budget and our savings, and because we knew that we weren't sacrificing any potential need or security in our future, we could simply go and buy the car and feel free and feel content, feel joy, and ultimately experience the success that solid, healthy saving habits and budgeting can yield.